Welcome back. This doesn't happen often, so when it does, it's worth digging into. There were Senate Republicans who dissented and basically would not do what President Trump asked, which is to vote to confirm his nominated prosecutor, that is to say U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. His name is Ed Martin. Well, here's what the president had to say when he admitted that sad but difficult truth.
He's a terrific person, and he wasn't getting the support from people that I thought. You know, he's done a very good job. Crime is down 25% in D.C. It is unbelievable, and hopefully we can bring him into, whether it's DOJ or whatever, in some capacity.
Mr. President, you can bring him into whatever non-Senate confirmable capacity you wish. You know that. I don't need to tell you that, but that's probably what's going to happen. Margaret Talev joins me now. She's a senior contributor for Axios, and also here at the table, Daniella Diaz, congressional reporter for NOTUS. Remember, NOTUS, News of the U.S. We'll get to Ed Martin in a second. I want your quick take, your hot take, because today is a day for hot takes about the future of the Catholic Church. First American Pope. Go for it, Margaret.
I mean, he's sort of a pope of the world, but he's definitely got a foothold in America and Chicago.
Chicago and Villanova.
Less. Yes, absolutely. I think, you know, his recent and public comments critical of this U.S. administration, of the Trump administration, vis-a-vis immigration, had to be part of the internal vetting process.
It seems that that is a fairly drawn inference. We don't know, but that seems to be a fairly drawn inference.
If you're the secret team voting for the Pope, you're going to think about what they're bringing to the table.
And you know that history.
Absolutely. It's not only history, it happened like a minute ago. So I think like...
In the history of the church, it is definitely like 2 seconds ago.
Eye blink ago. So I think, look, I think it's definitely interesting. President Trump's initial comments out of the box were like, how cool, an American Pope. Are there going to be public tangles, or is it going to be a more subtle messaging? I think we'll have to see. But this is certainly not only a surprise selection, but a very interesting selection.
And Daniella, probably safe to assume we will see no more AI-generated Pope images of President Trump.
No, but what I find most interesting, I grew up Catholic. This is an interesting, we were just talking in the backstage about this. This is really interesting. I'm mostly curious to see what J.D. Vance has to say. When we discovered the Pope's Twitter account, the new Pope's Twitter account, he actually tweeted some stories critical of J.D. Vance and the administration on immigration. I'm not entirely sure if J.D. Vance has said anything publicly yet.
Yes.
What did he say?
Put out a social media post, just enthusiastic, great news. Wish you good luck in your service.
I'm curious what it's going to be like when he specifically asked.
Yeah, kind of anodyne, but it was supportive for sure.
When he specifically asked about these criticisms from this American Pope that no one saw coming, critical of the administration.
So, who's Ed Martin, and why does he matter? Margaret Talev.
Well, he has been acting as the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., and he also has defended some of the January 6th defendants and their right to do so, and downplayed their role, and then spent some time
called January 6th Mardi Gras.
Spent some time in his interim capacity purging that office of prosecutors who prosecuted those defendants. And so now what has happened is at least one Senate Republican sort of took one for the team of all the other Senate Republicans who also did not want him confirmed as the U.S. Attorney. And so President Trump is going to need to, he has pulled that nomination and is going to need to follow up with a new one.
It's been difficult to discern bridges too far in the early days of the Trump administration 2.0, but Daniella, this appears to be one of them.
This appears to be one of them, and also the senator that came out against this nomination, also really interesting. It was Tom Tillis in North Carolina, who is facing a really tough re-election in his home state and has to, in many ways, align with Trump on a lot of issues. And he came out, he sits on the Judiciary Committee. That's the panel in charge of passing this nomination to the full Senate, where, again, there was other senators that were probably going to oppose this, like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. And he said, I just cannot support someone who is, had these comments about January 6th. I've spoken to the administration, and it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of political blowback he gets for that.
My sense of it is you take this hard stance because you're going to make a deal with the president on something he cares about even more, which is the future of the tax bill. And you have some reporting on the House side about where House Republicans, at least publicly, say they are, in the word that we all say, and someday I promise to explain the history thereof, reconciliation.
Just a couple hours ago, I was on Capitol Hill talking to these members of Congress, specifically the moderates, the ones that want to see, we call them the salty caucus, the salt caucus, that want to see state and local tax deductions caps raised in blue states. Also, the moderates who won't go back home during to campaign with their voters, with Medicaid cuts on the table. So these are the members, that Speaker Mike Johnson is meeting with consistently this week. We'll probably continue having conversations with them over the weekend to try to get them on board on this package, because as these members say, they're the ones that delivered the majority to Speaker Mike Johnson. He can't afford to lose
And the bottom line is they're not there yet.
They're not there yet, and they really do not want to see massive cuts. But then there's the House Freedom Caucus. They want these massive cuts. How is Speaker Mike Johnson going to do this?
Margaret, you and I are seasoned observers.
Yeah, old.
That's what I will say. Seasoned observers of the reconciliation process. And you and I both know that there is an imperative for the first bill of this kind for a new administration. We don't know how the imperative actually sorts itself out, but ultimately
It has to get done. That's the deal. It has to get done. And so there will be a path. The question is, what will be the details? The devil are in the details. And I think your observation about Senator Tillis is quite astute. When we talk about the difficult reelection campaign he would be facing in 2026, it's partly a difficult reelection campaign because of the general election, because it is a battleground state. It's North Carolina. If there's a backlash to the Trump administration, it's going to fall on Republican incumbents sitting for reelection to office. So, yes, in theory, Tillis could face a really tough Republican primary if President Trump decides he wants to exact revenge or punishment. But if he can be an important partner to Trump on crucial fronts, including taxes and budget issues, and if he has a better chance than random other Republican primary challenger in a general election, that could all become part of the Trump team's calculus.
And Danielle, I always remind everyone watching this show, when speaking of Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, he has this approach that is different than his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy.
Very.
And he goes through an elaborate, sometimes exhausting conversational process. He is sort of endlessly cheerful as he goes through it, doesn't seem fatigued at all. And so far, every time there's been a moment of drama, he's pulled them just across the line.
And
Not to say that's what's going to happen this time, but you have to look at that past and say, you got to take that into account.
I don't have as much experience as you two at the table, I will say.
Be glad of that, Danielle. Be glad of that.
I will say I
You
was
have much
there.
less scar tissue than the two of us.
Not even, with the greats is how I feel. But I was there when then Speaker McCarthy was booted, when we watched 22 days of no speaker. And then suddenly Speaker Mike Johnson appeared, and then he won again in January. And I covered that as well. And we're seeing him, he has a very different way of towing the line around these different factions in the conference. And he is someone who doesn't make promises that he can't keep, that he always says that publicly to reporters every single day. So when there is a lot of optimism within the conference, the mood is, he's talking to us. When you talk to these individual members like I do every single day, he's talking to us. We're optimistic we're going to get somewhere. And as Nicole Malliotakis told me just a couple of hours ago, everyone will get everything, maybe not fully what they want, but something's going to happen where everyone's
They will
happy.
get some of something.
Some of something is a great way to put it.
Exactly. Margaret Talev, Daniella Diaz, thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it.